For Cloak of Deception, James Luceno was instructed to write a political thriller that focused on Senator Palpatine and Chancellor Valorum. So he looked to authors like Frederick Forsyth and Robert Ludlum for inspiration. Luceno's novel was also the first to benefit from a sneak peek at Episode 2's screenplay, so we are introduced to groups like the Commerce Guild and the Banking Clan. Cloak of Deception made it to number 12 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of June 17, 2001, and was ultimately on the list for 2 weeks. I thought that I had read Cloak of Deception back in 2001, but now I'm not so sure because during my reread, nothing felt familiar at all. So, a brief summary. Mired in greed and corruption and tangled in bureaucracy, the Galactic Republic is crumbling. As humans and aliens meet for an emergency trade summit, conspiracies run rampant and no one is above suspicion. But the greatest threat of all remains unknown to everyone, except for 3 members of the Trade Federation who have entered into a shadowy alliance. In keeping with a political thriller, Luceno brings a lot of different characters into the mix here. We obviously have Supreme Chancellor Valorum, his aide, and Senator Palpatine and his aides, but we also have numerous other senators, we have the members of the Trade Federation, we have the moderates and the terrorists of the Nebula Front. We have loads of Jedi, from Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi to members of the Jedi Council and Luceno's original creation, Vergere. So there's a lot to keep track of here and a lot of threads running through the story. All the senators are scheming for various reasons. The Jedi are trying to ensure that the Chancellor is kept safe, at the same time that they're really out of the loop with what's going on. The Trade Federation gets drawn into Darth Sidious's scheming, likewise the Nebula Front as well, but no one really has any idea of what's really going on, except for Palpatine and Sidious. Despite his very few scenes, I felt like the novelization of The Phantom Menace showed us Valorum as someone who had been betrayed by a close friend, someone he considered an ally. And Luceno really builds on Valorum's character here, very much making him someone who is far too trusting, who has good intentions, but who unknowingly allows himself to be used by Palpatine. Valorum has good intentions, but Palpatine's there every step of the way to direct Valorum on the path he wants him to take. And while he pretends to be a friend to him, he also sets him up, makes it look like he's corrupt, that he's taking funds for personal gain. Luceno said he was told that Palpatine's history was off limits, but you do get a sense of Palpatine as this political schemer who is very much a Janus character that wears 2 faces. To the public, he appears to be this kindly, smiling older senator, but as we know, he has another side that is very duplicitous and straight up evil. Palpatine uses his 2 aides, Doriana and Pestage, who have a deeper history in later expanded universe works in the timeline, are just straight up creating false information and leaving it for other senators to be discovered. And the other senators are a mixed bag. We have the senator from Ryloth who does not support Valorum and definitely seems corrupt. And then senators like Bail Antilles of Alderaan who have good intentions but seem to be mired by the environment in which they work. Overall, just the sense you get of the Senate in this book is that it's rotting, that there are so many people with self-interest at play that nothing gets done, and what does get done is funded by bribes and special interest groups, and so it's just a bureaucracy-ridden mess. The Trade Federation, who have representation in Senate, which at least Lucino explains, because that was one aspect of the Phantom Menace that I was confused by, outline systems who agree to join the Trade Federation, give up their representation in the Senate, and instead agree to be represented by the Trade Federation senator. I don't like this idea, and Valorum clearly doesn't either, because in pushing for taxation of the free trade routes, he says that he wants those outlying systems who are currently only represented by the Trade Federation to actually have their own senators. Anyway, the politics in the prequel era especially make my head throb, so I won't get into that too much, but Cloak of Deception is the first instance where we see Sidious approaching the Trade Federation with his plans. Sidious's plans leading up to and during the Phantom Menace are mind-boggling, especially if you're trying to figure them out only based on what you see in the film. I have heard that Lucino's Darth Plagueis novel explains everything in great detail, but since that didn't come out till 2012, and I'm just reading the books through 2005 at that point, I'm trying to see if I can understand everything without that later knowledge. And it does seem very convoluted. I suppose that's a political thriller for you, that everything is just so intricate and complex. But basically, Sidious allies with the Trade Federation. He also allies with the Nebula Front, gets the Nebula Front to steal a whole bunch of money from the Trade Federation. They give that money to Palpatine. Palpatine then has his aide give that money to a corporation that the Valorum family owns, and then has the senator from Ryloth and then the senator from Alderaan investigate that situation. It's very complicated. Suffice it to say that at the end of the novel, the Neimoidians in the Trade Federation come out on top, which is exactly what Sidious wants, because they're the ones he can manipulate the most. And the Nebula Front ends up absolutely decimated in the end. The taxation of the free trade routes is passed, which gets the Trade Federation all riled up, which gets them purchasing all these weapons. Well, they didn't really intend to, but Sidious sort of pushed them into it, which directly leads to the blockade of Naboo that opens the Phantom Menace. At this point in time, the Jedi are completely unaware of the existence of the Sith, the re-emergence of the Sith. And what they're mostly concerned with is the Nebula Front, although that seems very much a Qui-Gon Jinn only concern. The rest of the Jedi Council in particular, it seems like they wish he would stop focusing all his attention on it, but Qui-Gon is committed. And then later in the novel, they are very focused on foiling the assassination plot against Supreme Chancellor Valorum. We see a lot of Jedi here. We're introduced to Luminara Unduli, who we will meet in The Approaching Storm by Alan Dean Foster and in Attack of the Clones. We see a number of the members of the Jedi Council, so we learn that Adi Gallia is like a close friend with the Chancellor. We see Yaddle, we see like pretty much all of them. If there was one thing I found unbelievable, it's that so many members of the Jedi Council were assigned to the mission to the Nebula Front base. Vergere came along, which was fun. It was fun to see Vergere before the events of Rogue Planet, and especially before the events of the New Jedi Order, but she's mostly just there being a good bird Jedi. So I do wish we had had more characters like Vergere along for the mission rather than Yaddle and Sastine and prominent council members who probably have better things to do with their time. And while I liked the presence of the Nebula Front, I felt like they weren't utilized to their full potential. They are a group in the outlying systems who are greatly opposed to what the Trade Federation is doing. They started out as more moderates, but there's been a militant terrorist front that is coming to the forefront in their organization. It's the militant side that plans the attack on the Trade Federation freighter in the beginning of the story, who steals all the money, who have a failed assassination attempt on Valorum, and then have the entire scheme at the trade summit on Eriadu at the end. But I felt like we never got a good sense of what they want beyond they don't like the Trade Federation. Like, what are their goals here? They wanted representation at the trade summit, and Valorum wouldn't invite them. There's this violent side of them, but there's another side that doesn't want that, and that's the side that Qui-Gon Jinn has contact with. And especially towards the end, when everyone's racing around on Eriadu, I felt like one character in particular, Captain Cole, who had been so prominent in the first part of the story, really lost importance there, and I would have liked to see his character used more rather than he's there, he sort of drops out of the story, he comes back, he's betrayed, and then he dies. I think the hardest thing for readers with Cloak of Deception might be just the fact that it is a political thriller, that there are perhaps less action scenes than you would expect. There's a lot of senators scheming, people planting things, people talking, Senate scenes, which culminates in the political intrigue plot perhaps being overly convoluted. I think there are some readers who would find that part very interesting, who would love to try to unravel all the plots that are going on. And this is perhaps a your mileage may vary problem, where I'm not really a big political thriller reader. I would have, I think, appreciated if the plot was not quite so complex. Because as it is, I feel like you almost need to make, at times, a flow chart of who's doing what and who's scheming this, and how all the schemes play out. Which I think is why people tend to struggle with the reasoning behind the political stuff in the prequels, but in the Phantom Menace in particular. That could probably be a whole nother video just before Darth Plagueis came out. How did people view Sidious's schemes? Obviously, the end result he wants is to be made Supreme Chancellor, but it seems a very convoluted way to get there. Almost, why put this corruption charge on Valorum when what got Valorum kicked out of office was less the corruption and more his inactivity? I guess, unless it's just Palpatine wanting to really kick a man while he's down, that, you don't just remove him from office, but you make it look like he's dirty in the process. I also wish that we had maybe gotten a little bit more into Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's characters. They're secondary characters here. They're not as important as the roles that Valorum and Palpatine play. But I expected to get some insight into them. And while perhaps we got a little bit more insight into Qui-Gon as the Maverick, how he doesn't listen to the Jedi Order, how he just follows what he sees as right, Obi-Wan's just there. He's snarky. He questions things and then comes up with answers, but there's not a lot of meat to his character. And I suspect that was somewhat intentional on Lucino's part, because in an interview with the Star Wars website that I'll link down in the description box, he said that earlier drafts had Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan playing a much more prominent role, and that as he worked on the story, he lessened a lot of the action and instead amped up the intrigue. But it makes me feel like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are just here because they have to be here. I get that feeling from a lot of the prequels books that the authors were told, you must include these characters. But I almost question why, because we don't get any new information or new revelations about these characters. It doesn't deepen our understanding of them at all. They're just there to fulfill a quota. Likewise with the Jedi Council members, there are some interesting tidbits like, Yaddle apparently was imprisoned for 100 years, and she's half of Yoda's age, so that's a really long span of time and a story I would really like to hear. But they mostly seem to be there for window dressing. We need Jedi, and at this point in time in the story, the only Jedi we've really been introduced to are council members, so let's just throw a whole bunch of them into the mix. I also felt like Lucino's writing tended to get bogged down with descriptions at times. I found that especially notable with the Jedi, where every single Jedi we would be introduced to and they'd be described in some detail. And a lot of times I feel like I do want descriptions of alien species, especially ones that either I've never seen before or I'm not familiar with. But at this point in time, I know Yoda. I know what he looks like. You can throw a reference to, like, Yoda's ear twitched at what Qui-Gon had to say, but you don't have to give me, like, a paragraph-long description of what he looks like, and his little green skin, and his little cane, and his big ears, and it's, like, unnecessary. If you are reading this book and you don't know what Yoda looks like, have you seen any of the movies? And I just think that Lucino's choice to dial down the action means that the book is slow going at times. It's deliberate, and you may like that pace, you may not like that pace. But I felt like there were times where I was having to wade through the story to discover a good bit, an interesting bit, because I have to be honest, I'm not really interested in all the political stuff in the prequels, and this book is just all political stuff. It does explain the lead up to the Phantom Menace really well, but I think you have to enjoy that aspect of the story to get a lot of enjoyment out of Cloak of Deception. So, in short, Cloak of Deception is a complex political thriller that gives a lot of information about the lead up to Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. If you are a political thriller fan, if you love the political aspects of the prequel movies, then definitely give Cloak of Deception a read. I think you'll really enjoy it. If you are less of a political fan and more interested in other aspects of the story, like the Jedi, the Nebula Front, the Trade Federation things, you may be a little bit more frustrated with the story, as I was, feeling like it was overly complex. But at the same time, I did appreciate the deeper understanding it gave me of Supreme Chancellor Valorum and of Palpatine, that there is very much this Shakespearian relationship at play, where Valorum is the overly trusting one, and Palpatine is like Iago, who's backstabbing him every step of the way while he has a smile on his face. So next time, I'm going to be reading a prequel to Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, The Approaching Storm by Alan Dean Foster. Sammy. Hello, Sammy. Hi.